Back in the late 90s, there was a controversial writer slash producer in professional wrestling, back when it was still considered to be professional wrestling instead of sports entertainment. There was a controversial figure in the business named Vince Russo. He was partially responsible for the Attitude Era in the WWF in the late 90s, which many considered to be the greatest era in the history of the business. 1999. Russo, he leaves the WWF to join WCW. Before his arrival in WCW, he was interviewed in one of those dirt sheets, or maybe he was interviewed on radio. Either way, during the interview, Vince Russo, he claimed that Mexican wrestlers would never get over with the American audience. The basis of his argument was that American wrestling fans wanted to see American wrestlers. That doesn't mean that Mexican wrestlers couldn't succeed in America, but in terms of who was going to carry the company, typically it's going to be American-born wrestlers. Now, at the time, Vince Russo was vilified, got a lot of heat for his comments, but he wasn't necessarily wrong. Look at most of the icons in professional wrestling, guys who carried the business. Hogan, Austin, Rock, Cena, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes. Hell, his entire gimmick was the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. More recently, you have guys like Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes. What do they all have in common? They're all American. Over the past few years, the NBA has been struggling. Now, they're not struggling like CNN is struggling. NBA ratings aren't in the pooper, but the NBA doesn't have the same feel to it, doesn't have the same level of impact that it had in the past, especially during the regular season. Now, there's a variety of reasons as to why the NBA is struggling, but I'm starting to wonder if the rise of international stars could be playing a role in the NBA's decline. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Earlier this week, Jalen Rose made an interesting comment on Twitter. Now, as you guys know, Father Jalen Rose, former lead pastor at Woke United Methodist. He was the spiritual leader of Brother Stephen A. Smith and Sister Sharp. Hey, it's me, Shay Shay! Father Rose, he was responsible for drafting legislation that would outlaw use of the term Mount Rushmore. You know, because having the faces of the founding fathers and legendary presidents on the side of a mountain is a reminder of the mythical racism plaguing this evil country. Of course, this proposed legislation from Father Rose, it was quickly forgotten. For starters, no one was biting into that shit sandwich, and he was fired by the worldwide leader in Woke, ESPN, ultimately losing his position as lead pastor at Woke United Methodist. But maybe the time away has given Father Rose a little bit of clarity, because he made an interesting point the other day on Twitter. Check it out for yourself. Basically, Jalen Rose is insinuating that more and more NBA jobs are being taken by international players. Now, obviously, he is using a little bit of hyperbole here by saying NBA jobs are becoming extinct. Last I checked, 70% of the league was still American, but still, 30% of the players in the NBA, they are coming from overseas. The question is this having an impact on NBA ratings? First, let's go ahead and get to the recent ratings for the NBA playoffs. Then I'll tell you why I think the influx of international star players could be negatively impacting the league on television. Through the second round of the playoffs, ratings are down 11%. Right now, the NBA is averaging 3.7 million viewers per game. That's not bad. Not bad, but it's not what I would call great either. Game 7 Sunday between the Pacers and Knicks, 6.5 million on ABC, down 24%. 1995 was the last time the Pacers and Knicks played in a Game 7. That game was broadcast on NBC. For those of us who grew up in the 90s, NBC is the real home of the NBA. That Game 7 in 95, almost 13 million viewers, doubling the audience from this past Sunday. Anthony Edwards and the T-Wolves, they've been one of the lone bright spots in the second round. Game 7 Sunday night against the Nuggets, 8.4 million viewers. It was the largest audience on TNT since 2009. Game 6 Saturday night between the Thunder and the Mavs, two teams featuring international star players, 5.6 million viewers. Significantly lower than Pacers, Knicks, Wolves, Nuggets. But KC Jokic is an international star player. He's a huge star! Is he? Is Jokic really a big star, a transcendent star, a draw on television? If that's the case, how come ratings for the NBA Finals last year were a big fat turd? Remember when Giannis won the title a couple of years ago? If you were to remove the bubble championship in 2020, the Giannis Finals, least watched in 15 years. The San Antonio Spurs, they were a dynasty in the mid-2000s. They were also responsible for the worst ratings in NBA history to that point. Remember the trio of stars in San Antonio? What did they all have in common? They were all international players. Like I've said before, Adam Silver got extremely lucky with the emergence of Anthony Edwards. This dude's going to be the face of the NBA for the next decade. If Zion Williamson can stay healthy, hell, if Zion can just get to the playoffs and make a deep run, you could potentially have two transcendent stars in the NBA at the same time. But that doesn't change the fact that we are seeing more and more international stars in the league. If you want to know what happens when domestic players either abandon a sport altogether or they're just not good enough to compete with international players, just look at Major League Baseball. 30 years ago, Major League Baseball was insanely popular. Remember all the stars in baseball in the 90s? Ricky Henderson, Frank Thomas, David Justice, Derek Jeter, Deion Sanders, Mark Grace, Randy Johnson. There were international players in baseball in the 90s, but the stars, the draws, they were domestic. Look at Major League Baseball today. Who is the biggest star in baseball? Shohei Ohtani. How's that working out? How is baseball performing in the ratings? If you look at their impact in the mainstream, Major League Baseball's been forgotten. No one talks about baseball. Turn on ESPN, turn on FS1, listen to sports talk radio, or listen to sports channels here on YouTube. How many people do you see talking about Major League Baseball? You know why they don't? You know why I don't present baseball topics besides the fact that I don't watch it? I don't talk about baseball because, for the most part, you guys don't want to hear about it. You're not interested. You don't watch the WNBA either, but some of my best performing videos are me shitting on the dump. Shohei Ohtani might be a big star, but he's not a draw on television. If you want to know the difference between a star and a draw, just look at what Caitlin Clark has done for the WNBA. This is a league that can't draw the drowning careers at sea into a lifeboat. Caitlin Clark enters the league. WNBA, they see the highest ratings they've seen in 20 years. Back in January, it was reported that the NHL has more American-born players in the league right now than at any other point in league history. Almost 30% of the NHL consist of American players. The NHL playoffs, they are airing on ESPN and TNT, same networks as the NBA. Headline today at the Daily Caller: NHL playoff ratings are some of the best in league history. Is there a correlation? Are ratings in the NHL going up because there's been an influx of domestic players? I don't know, but maybe Jalen Rose has a point. For the most part, if you look at some of the biggest stars in the NBA, they're international players. Luka Doncic, Jokic, Joel Embiid, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Giannis, Ben Simmons when he was actually playing. If you look at boom periods in the NBA, the booms, they are typically carried by domestic players. Magic Bird in the 80s, Jordan, Reggie Miller, Patrick Ewing in the 90s. The last boom period was in the 2010s, carried by Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, and Steph Curry. For some reason, Americans just don't seem as interested in a league when it's not being carried by American stars. That doesn't mean there's no interest, but it just doesn't seem to have the same level of impact. Another problem I see for the NBA is the changing of the landscape on television, a problem that the NBA is creating for itself. Yesterday, the Sports Business Journal, they reported that the NBA has potentially made a decision regarding which networks will carry the league through the next 10 or 11 years. Good news is, the NBA could be returning to NBC. Woohoo! Yes, yes, yes! For those of us who grew up in the 90s, the NBA returning to NBC is great. Will they be able to recreate the magic of the 1990s? Obviously not. But NBC is a hell of a lot more competent when it comes to broadcasting sports than ESPN. Problem is, Adam Silver is making the mistake of not distancing the NBA from the worldwide leader in woke. Instead of getting rid of ESPN, it looks like Adam Silver will be abandoning TNT. When this story broke yesterday, this news went over like a silent fart on the set of The View. As you guys know, our lovely yentas, they don't like the silent flatulence. They prefer the strong, powerful, booming flatulence of the whoopee cushion. Many NBA fans are upset that the league could be leaving TNT, mainly because that means inside the NBA will cease to exist. On paper, this decision seems to make sense for the NBA. ESPN is a network dedicated to sports, supposedly, while TNT is a network dedicated to... Well, I don't know what the hell TNT broadcasts outside of the NBA. The only time I watch TNT is when I'm watching the NBA. But the problem with this decision, ESPN's coverage of the NBA, it sucks. The face of their NBA coverage, Stephen A. Smith, doesn't even watch the league. The legendary Ernie Johnson anchors the pre- and post-game shows on TNT. Who does ESPN have? Malika Andrews. They also have NBA analysts who are veteran trash collectors in the WNBA dump. Sometimes you turn on NBA Today, it's an all-female panel. There's not a single person on the panel who played in the NBA. TNT has Kevin Harlan, Ian Eagle. Their resident doofus is Reggie Miller. Reggie Miller aggravates some people, but he's a hell of a lot better than the resident doofus at ESPN, Mark Jones. Who? Mark Jones! Mark Jones! Adam Silver. He is going to give ESPN the NBA's A package again, and I think it's a monumental mistake. On one hand, I get it, I understand. With ESPN, you have a network that talks about the NBA 24/7. Can't get that same level of coverage with TNT or NBC. But at the same time, ESPN doesn't really talk about the NBA. They talk about the Lakers. They talk about the Warriors. Every once in a while, they'll mention Kevin Durant and the Suns, while every other team is completely ignored. If ESPN lost the NBA, if Adam Silver went with TNT and NBC, ESPN, they would still cover the league every day because the NBA is the only thing keeping ESPN alive. But give me your thoughts on this. NBA ratings down 11% through the first two rounds of the playoffs. Why? Give me your reason. Do you think the influx of international star players could be hurting NBA ratings? Let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the video. Appreciate your support. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter, and I'll see you guys later.